This is the Therapy Chat Podcast with Laura Reagan, LCSWC. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Laura Reagan, LCSWC.
Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan, and today I'm overjoyed, to be honest, that I'm going to be speaking with a guest who's been on Therapy Chat a couple times before, and we'll talk about that. And today my guest is Paula Scatoloni. Paula, thank you so much for coming back to Therapy Chat today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Yeah, we've kind of grown and evolved since the last time you were here. I think, everyone has grown and evolved since the last time you were here, because that was in 2019 before COVID. I remember it might have even been in early 2020. I remember, I was in my in-person office then when we recorded, and now I don't even have that office anymore. But, let's start off by, we have so much to talk about, but let's start off by you telling our audience a little more about who you are and what you're currently doing.
Sure. So I'm Paula Scatoloni, and many people might know me from my work with embodied recovery as an eating disorder therapist. So I've been in the field of mental health for over 30 years and primarily focused on eating disorders and embodiment through working with that population and training therapists. But I'm also a somatic practitioner. So I'm trained in somatic experiencing and many of the advanced modalities that stemmed from somatic experiencing, including touch work. And then more recently, people know me through my work with sound, and particularly modern acoustics, which I call psychoacoustics. My work with Dr. Stephen Porges' Safe and Sound Protocol, and my unique use of it as a tool for inner transformation and deep healing of the psyche and the soma.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're going to get into today. I met you through Embodied Recovery, which you and Rachel Lewis Marlowe developed. And I've done the level 1 training, which was amazing. I loved that it was a somatic, sensory, attachment, and trauma-based method for working with eating disorder, healing from eating disorders. And I love it and recommend it all the time. And even when I was in your training, and that was in like maybe 2017 or 2018, you were talking about the Safe and Sound Protocol then, and I was curious about it then as well, and had begun the training, but I didn't, at that time, it was still kind of adapting, sort of shifting in the way that it was delivered from being primarily occupational therapists who were using it to being more available and adapted to trauma therapy and trauma work in general. And, so I've kind of had it in mind and started the training and stopped and started again. And then I was like, I want to experience it for myself. And after the pandemic, we got in touch and you shared that you were, well, not after the pandemic, like last year we connected, and you talked about that you are delivering it in a really different way. And I went through one of your groups and had a completely transformational, life-changing experience. So that's what I want to talk about, is sort of all of those layers of what is this? How are you using it? What does it do? How does it help? What's happening? What is psychoacoustics? So we've got a lot to get into.
Great. I love it. Yeah, I think if we, to simplify, I think there's an emerging field of sound, right, that we're in the middle of. And we see this renaissance right now with therapists that are saying, basically, my toolbox isn't big enough to support the type of healing that needs to happen right now. The ancestral healing, collective healing, the deep, generational healing. And so sound is moving up there as a modality, not just for nervous system regulation, but for being able to access things that we may not be able to access through talking, and works very similar to somatics, but also to other processes that people have, like psychedelics or shamanic practices. Sound can plug right in there, depending on the practitioner and how the practitioner uses it. But you're right. When we first met, it was primarily, we were talking about sensory processing issues, right? And how to use sound to support sensory processing. And the Safe and Sound protocol developed by Dr. Porges was designed and used a lot by occupational therapists for that purpose. And so that was initially what we were coming in and understanding it through that lens, right? How do we support a system that is needing help with how you take in information through the auditory pathway? And it was originally designed for children with autism. And in 2017, I got a hold of it with a few other somatic experiencing practitioners, and we began to consider it as a vehicle for helping with trauma in the very same way that somatic experiencing might work as a resource for the body, and then understanding, what happens when we resource the body through sound.
Yeah. And it's mind-blowing, I would say, how the psychoacoustics facilitate access to I guess our attachment system is what I experienced. It's just shocking how, I guess, I'm obviously having a hard time putting it into words. What can be accessed that you don't know isn't being accessed until you touch it?
Yes. I think it works very similar to touch, some of the trainings on touch or psychedelics, where we're creating such a deep parasympathetic response. And a sense, in this case, we're talking about the use of an instrument that's designed to help you come into a felt sense of safety through the auditory system, right? By stripping the high and low tones, so you're only hearing the frequency of safety. And then somatically, as that occurs, as the body's resourced through safety from a somatic experiencing perspective, then material that needs to be processed starts to emerge, right, into consciousness. And it's different than some of the processes we may be trained in, where we may go after the material itself cognitively, right, and then invite the body along. This is a passive intervention. So we put it on and then allow the resourcing to occur, and then allow the body to share the narrative in terms of what needs to come up to be healed. And we wrote a 45-page manual for somatic experiencing practitioners to be able to understand and grasp some of the somatic experiencing concepts and how to use them. But I think it's applicable even if you're not a somatic experiencing practitioner, understanding the implications for when we feel safe and what we can process and access when safety, relational safety, is there. And that's some of what you experienced. And so from a purely, bottom-up perspective, if we stay with the science, safety creates the conditions for more material to emerge that needs to be seen, felt, and heard. We're trusting that the body is guiding that process. And then there's another layer of it for which is not explained, perhaps through science, which for me speaks more of what sound healing can do or what the resonance of the provider can afford. And that deepens the process, exponentiates it even further.
So I want to talk much more about that, but I'm stuck on a point. I want to ask, this manual that you mentioned for somatic experiencing practitioners, is that something that is available for therapists to access who aren't involved with somatic experiencing? Because I know I would love to read that.
To read it. That's a good question. It was published through Unite, the company that owns the Safe and Sound. And so I'm not sure how they're distributing it at this point. It was created a few years ago and is available as a resource similar to those that are created for EMDR therapists or other therapists that are combining modalities. But I do think it speaks to just a basic understanding of the nervous system and how it works and what to look for during the Safe and Sound protocol process through the lens of the nervous system, which is mostly what you experienced in my group, right? What's happening and how do I understand it through the lens of the nervous system?
Right. And as someone who, wants to complete the training and offer Safe and Sound protocols so far, and because I haven't finished the training, I can't say, but so far I haven't, I'm still in the but how would you know? I mean, I am a somatic practitioner. I use sensory motor psychotherapy, and I know how to identify when someone is out of their window of tolerance somatically and to help people identify that. But I want to know within that protocol, which isn't exactly what we're here to talk about, but I want to know within that protocol how to ensure that the person's nervous system is able to remain within a sense of safety. Because as someone who has experienced it now, and I had no negative experiences, but I know that when you're listening, it can be hard to really tell if, you don't always feel this intense effect while you're listening. It's kind of as you process what you listen to, somehow as your body processes it, that's where you identify how much, and it's the practitioner. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but
okay. This
is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, there's many ways to hold this. One way to hold it is that you are being resourced through the sound. You're correct. And then your response to being invited into safety tells us a lot about your nervous system, right? Is that okay to be in safety, right? And what I tend to watch for and teach people about is how your defenses are going to come up during the process to tell the story about why you went into your defense system in the first place. And if we can hold the reactions in that way with curiosity, we can keep unfolding the narrative so that it isn't this experience of, oh, I have a headache. That's something bad is happening during the listening. So, oh, I must have a pattern of constriction, and that is the pattern that I'm feeling. How can I resource the body and feel that? Even, we can toss in some parts work, feel that as a part, a survival strategy that may have been employed when I was younger because I needed it. And now how can I support that pattern in shifting? Because we're creating lubricating and creating neuroplasticity with this intervention.
Yeah.
So your ability to understand that that's happening would allow you to tolerate whatever you're experiencing with curiosity and knowing that, there's a headache. We have choices. We can pause. We can titrate. We can make sense of it. And then we can come back to listening again.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't want to go too far down that path because I can ask you about this on our own, that part. But so the next thing that really, really stood out from what you were sharing that I want to explore with you is when you were talking about, you said the resonance of the provider is an important aspect of what's able to be accessed in the experience. So can you share a little bit more about what you're saying there?
Sure. I think there's some different ways that we're already talking about it in other places. For example, Dan Siegel talks about it as a somatic resonance, an intersubjective space, right? And we know as providers that our nervous system impacts the nervous system of the client, right? So we can think of it through that, right? So if I'm regulated, then the person sitting across from me is going to feel that at some level, right? Which will create a sense of safety in their system. But I think even further, if I'm not just regulated, if I'm embodied in a very deep way and in a place within myself that in our training, we would say if you're in your yield, your capacity to yield, which is present moment awareness and a degree of being centered in the heart, in the back of the heart, in this place of consciousness where we are able to allow whatever needs to be there within the client, within the space between us to unfold. We're not in a place of the mind. We're in a place of being. Okay. That capacity, when you're in that place, that infuses the space between you and the client, and that can change the trajectory of the experience because that space is now available as a space for healing, which takes us out of scientific into more of the mystical.
Which is a good place to be when we're trying to heal, because the scientific helps us understand, but it also can get in the way of healing on both the, quote, healer and the person who is having a healing experience.
Yes. And it assumes that we know best, as opposed to trusting the organicity of the system to lead itself towards wholeness.
Mm-hmm. As my inner wisdom says, Laurie, don't worry about the manual.
Yes.
Trust the process.
Trust the process. But I feel, and I'll say this is true for me, so it might not be true for everyone, but the more embodied I became, the less I needed to hold on to things with my mind, right? So there's a correlation there. Where do we need to know something from? And, we can come into this deeper sense of embodied wisdom and allow processes to unfold, and not have to go in there with our left brain and make sense of it, but really trust. And I think that's what you experienced during the group. We also did something in the group that I don't think a lot of people do, which is we set an intention. And as a sound healer, as a healing arts practitioner, Jonathan Goldman talks about intention and resonance equals healing. So when we come into a resonance of compassion, of regulation, which would be associated with a state of what Thomas Hubel talks about as presencing. He calls it presencing, but we come into that state and then we add intention, then the sound can travel on that intention. And the intention that we set in the group, if you remember, was to call back all the parts of ourself which were not in resonance with unconditional love. That was our intention.
Yes. As you say that, I remember so clearly all of it and that particular intention specifically, and how that was embodied in our group and for myself. And calling back all the parts of ourselves. And many who are listening are familiar with parts work, IFS, also inner child work, and I use those ways of working, and yet I've never felt such a tangible connection with, I'd say, a particular part of myself, one of the, younger parts of myself that really felt like she wants to come back to me. And instead of me trying to find her, for people who are in therapy and who are therapists, we often, it's like, can you find the parts of yourself? And this is like seeing that part of me, wanting me, trying to find me, just as I was trying to find her. And somehow that was really different for me. It opened up a possibility of connection that with that part of myself that it seemed was blocked before. It's like it opened up a channel to be able to access that. And as you know, a lot of other surprising and unexplainable that I don't need to explain to myself because I just know they're real experiences happened that were so meaningful to my life. That's why I'm saying it was transformational and life-changing, because that's never going away. Those are now experiences that I've had that are guiding me on my life's journey in a clear and tangible way, differently from more of the sort of, I actually thought about this week. Like I've been familiar with the concept of like following the whispers of your soul. And whispers are like wisps that come, and it's like, is there something? What was that? And this is not a whisper. It's like a vision, a clarity that's, do you understand what I'm saying? The difference between like that concept of like a whisper and something that you feel connected with and maybe have always known, but it was blocked.
Yes. However we want to talk about this, my mind first went to the idea in internal family systems of unburdening, the layers of protection. And I think that's what we watched happen, right? And you could feel that. And it was somatic, right? It's like, oh, there's that protection right around my chest, or I'm holding it in my shoulders, right? And as that happens, and we met those parts with curiosity and compassion, then what was underneath it could merge. You could sort of reach your hand out and see, oh, she actually wants to connect with me. And that part is, I was just reading Peter's book this morning, and he talks a lot about the inner child in his book. And this sense of that part holds your wisdom across time and space. And that is part of what you're tapping into now. Right? Not just who she is now, but who she is in essence. and who she has always been. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. But it's funny because I guess it's a part too, but like a part of me is like, so if our inner wisdom is in our child self, I think that the part of me that came up is like more of a colonized belief of, but children, it doesn't feel right as I say it. So it doesn't feel like it's like true to me. But this part was like, but children don't know stuff. Like, how can a child hold all your inner wisdom? And even as I say that, I think about children and I think about my children, and they say, they always say out of the mouths of babes, but what kids say is like so true. That's why it's funny, or that's why it's like, we shake our heads like, how could they know this?
Yeah.
But they see how things are and they speak it.
Yeah. Well, if we wanted to get even more esoteric, we might hold it similar to, I lived 13 years in Hawaii, and that they have a metaphor of a bowl of light. And this idea that we are essentially come into this world as pure light, right? But through our conditioning, that light gets dimmed and we become a representation more of those conditions rather than of who we truly are. So the stripping away and the coming back to the child is a coming back to who we were before the conditioning took place. And that is maybe what you're feeling more connected to now.
That does feel true. So I feel like that part was just sort of like, but what? But kids don't know anything. Wait, what? It's like, no.
But as you can see, I think all of the avenues that we have now for getting there are, we're all going to get there, especially somatic based, right? Avenues. And it's merely it's like an onion. We just keep peeling the layers through these different modalities and working our way and listening. Like you're listening to that wisdom now and taking steps based on it, right? Which will allow you to embody more of that version of yourself, who you would have been had all the things not occurred in your life.
It's amazing how powerful a psychoacoustic intervention can be, a sound healing experience can be. And I think the sound bowl sessions that I've had that were beautiful and relaxing have been enjoyable, but not anything I could really sink into finding like a difference in myself between before and after. But the experience in our group, and it's not just the listening, it was the group too. It was what you were facilitating. It was all of that. When I say that it's something I'll take with me for the rest of my life, I mean that it feels like something changed that I can't not know now. And I can't do things the same way because of that new knowing, / always been there knowing. That's what it feels like.
I was smiling in reference to the group because I think that when you bring people together and they all commit to journeying, that there's a phenomenon that happens through the group process. So, and it's rich and deeply healing. And as each of you witnessed each other to come into more coherence with yourself, then that solidified and supported your own process as well.
Very much, because I would talk myself out of things without seeing other people having, like, they're describing something that I also experienced.
Yeah. And another thing that just popped in my head. So women in centuries past, coming together in groups and circles was a thing that they did. And I think we're tapping into that as well.
It was a thing they did, and some other people didn't like that.
Yes.
If you know what I mean.
Yes. Yes. So there's also an awakening of, I know how to do this, and I'm getting quenched. I didn't even know I was thirsty, but there's something getting quenched here in this process.
Yes. And speaking to what you said about like women gathering in groups, and what you were just speaking about with Peter Levine's newest book, we can't leave out in Hawaii the truth that Indigenous peoples have been doing earth-based practices like this for all time. And quote, science is what came along and tried to stamp that out as completely as possible, and, was extremely successful in destroying so many bonds of community that formerly existed. And I think there are many directions of ways that people are reclaiming those practices. And there are ways that they're also being co-opted too, So I think all of that is important to mention.
Yes. At a fundamental level, in my programs, we have 4 principles. One is coming from the head to the heart. The second is honoring the wisdom of the body. The third is the power of relationships. And the fourth is coming back to our roots. And I think these are principles that you find in Indigenous cultures. A recognition that everything is sacred, a recognition that we are whole, and innately whole, and that we are interconnected. And that has woken up in a big way for thousands of people, even those that are in white bodies like myself. And there is a wanting to speak about that and to give reverence and recognition to those cultures that hold that wisdom. And then we have people like Peter Levine, who's been able to break down some of the processes that occur in Indigenous healing in a very scientific and systematic way, and speaks about it now more openly in his book. But I also feel some of these other processes, I'm not trained in internal family systems, but the use of parts and the retrieval of parts, right, has some basic understanding as well, right? And then last week I was rereading Sandra Ingerman's book. She teaches in core shamanism. She's a psychotherapist, and I studied that for a while. I saw this common thread, right, in all these processes of trusting the body, allowing the wisdom to unfold, tuning into the relational space, and getting out of the way and inviting the organicity of healing to occur. So I think we're at a pivotal point with our paradigms where we can all agree that this is how healing takes place, deep transformative healing, not fixing. And we can now give recognition and find ways to work with those cultures and places where they need our support as well, right? With some of these modalities. and, learn and work together. That there's a place for collaboration to occur now.
Yes. In fact, I would say we must come together and not be competing against one another. For everyone who wants to be a part of bringing healing to the world, whether you are one who is working on healing yourself, for the effect that will have, the ripple effect that will have through all of your relationships, community, and the world, and hopefully everyone who is in a position to be delivering healing methods is also doing that work themselves, and expanding their capacity to share those methods with more people. Because, I say it a lot, but the current way, the violent way that our world is currently structured, and the hyper-individualism of Western culture, it's killing the planet. It's not promoting our humanity, our species even continuing on this earth, or even our planet being livable. So we have to come together and, with our positive intentions, and use, however you can get the information and share it out. Use the power that we have to benefit everyone else in the world.
That's why I appreciate your podcast and your ability to reach so many, and feel like I'm on that journey with you, from my platform, and hope. I know there are a lot of people still trying to work hard with the old paradigm, and they're exhausted, right? Because it doesn't work. And so we need to shed that and come into some new ways of understanding ourselves and helping our clients. And so I appreciate your what you have created for that information to come out there to the world. And I think I told you, before we got on, I told you you were pivotal in even my step towards this direction too. So I appreciate it.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you.
So you had, I don't know, you just said what year it was. It was 2017 or 18, or you had Susan Peace Bannett on talking about the trauma toolkit. And it was the first therapist that I had heard who was also working more shamanically or using Reiki. And I said, okay, we can do it all. Because I'd really kept those parts of my life separate for many, many years. And it's still taken me a few years to integrate it all, because I don't think we think holistically. It's one of the paradigms that is shifting. We think mental health, and that only means the mind. And now we have the body, but now we're ready for the next piece.
The spirit.
The spirit. And the heart. I call it the heart, coming into our hearts.
Yeah. Well, before we run out of time, I want to say a couple things about, I'm glad you brought up Susan Peace Bannett and her book, Wisdom, Attachment, and Love in Trauma Therapy Beyond Evidence-Based Practice, was where I felt permission to acknowledge that intuition is real, and using intuition in therapy not only is appropriate, but, to not access it is holding something away from the work that needs to be part of it. And Susan is the one who made me realize that the evidence-based practice model of, everything's logical, everything's randomized controlled trials, everything's black and white. There's a simple route to healing, and it's basically like get away from the body, mind, and spirit, and focus on cognition, basically. And that's kind of a long-term effect of the process that began during the Crusades of trying to wipe out all non-Christian practices, as that's like the basis of colonization. And additionally, I realized from a teacher who I greatly admire, Shauna Murray Brown, Dr. Shauna Murray Brown, who teaches about decolonizing. Her course is called Decolonizing Therapy for Black Folks. I started her course, and I'm very open. I have not yet finished it. I will go back to it, but I'm really doing that deep exploration within myself of decolonizing myself. And one thing she says is, white people, don't take our practices. Find your practices that align with what your ancestors would have been doing before those practices were taken away from them. And I thought, what? My ancestors? What ancestors? Do I have ancestors? And through personally exploring that at Shauna's invitation in that course, I've realized that, of course, I have ancestors, and my people before, quote, whiteness were Celtic, Irish, Scottish, and it feels very real that they probably were using herbal medicines and earth-based practices. And so it's not co-opting when you're actually connecting with what aligns with your own ancient ways of knowing that come from your own lineage. And so I wanted to say that because before learning with Shauna, I would have said, oh, white people shouldn't be doing anything spiritual or earth-based because that's not our scope. It's not our realm. It's not our place. And there is a place for that. And I want to encourage people to, trust that you can find your way to the healing path that's right for you. And I think you, again, with what you have shown me through the group that we did, and just from speaking with you and we're sort of like on the side, kind of talking about it a little more and learning a little more and practicing, experiencing a little more. It's connected me with, beyond my intuition. Like I've told you, like there was an ancestor who visited me that, like, you can't make it up. It's just that happened, and nobody said it was supposed to happen or anything. It just happened. I can't deny that. And it was super impactful. So it's like, if you create the space, you can connect with, you don't know what's in there until the space is there for you to feel safe to explore it. And that's what I gained from my experience with you and your group. And I hope to be, and I plan to be learning with you much more in many ways. Will you just say a little bit, and feel free to comment on anything I just said, but also I'd love for you to tell people more specifically what you have coming up. I know you're creating a podcast. You have a lot of ways that you're serving. And I want to be sure that people hear it's not just about this discussion of what's possible, but also how they could work with you.
Sure. And this might fold into some of what you shared, which was so rich. So what I'm hearing you say is you're tapping into your innate wisdom as, I don't like the word healer, as a change agent and as a person who's deeply connected to medicine. That is a different type of medicine, right? That's a more feminine medicine. and to ways of knowing. And so I do think that is part of why I'm here, is to help those who want to wake up to that and who know that being a therapist may be one way that they have, used that skill, but they would like to open to themselves beyond that. And so that process requires us to clean out and move away the barriers that have gotten in the way to us knowing who we are, right? So some of that is our trauma and our childhood wounding and the things that have caused us to hold ourselves back or keep ourselves small. So that's part of it. And so the people can engage at different levels. So you've engaged with it through this group that's based on using a polyvagal informed approach and the use of sound, modern acoustics, to help you access these deep layers of yourself, right? And reconnect with it, bring you into more regulation, more embodiment. So you become a different change agent for those that you are with. Right? And that clarity, the more embodied we are, the more you're accessing the clarity through your interoception and through your 5 senses that are just getting amplified, right? They're not additional senses. They're just amplified, right? And then if people are wanting to dive more into the ancestral piece, that there's a history that they would like to help heal within themselves from that they're holding in their hologram of who they are. I have a second course, and that course is interesting because it's based on, I don't know if your group received a lot of this, but during the SSP, while you're listening, I hear songs come in and I hear music and I get different song lyrics. And sometimes I'll give it to the group and then you can listen and do what you want with it. See what happens. But I decided to start tracking it and tracking maybe what it was talking about thematically. And what it came to be was it was telling a story about our own conflict within ourselves and how we hold these collective vibrations of, I would call archetypal masculine and the feminine within ourselves, yin and yang. So these songs would speak about that. And so there was enough of them that came through that I decided to create a group based on that. So that's another avenue for coming into deeper healing and understanding how you hold those dynamics within yourself, how they show up in your personality, in your somatics, and through the lens of the nervous system itself. And that's called acoustic alchemy. So it's music from the radio. And then I'm facilitating a sound healing as a sound healer with that music. You may have experienced it individually. That's the individual session we had. Yes. And then some ways, I think, for those who may have different financial resources, and I'm trying to find ways for everyone to be involved. So that might be through a consult group that's low cost for providers that want to come in and listen to some of the different ways that I work based on my background, if they have that similar background. They can also engage through, we're putting together a yoga and polyvagal music experience. We're testing out some new music for Dr. Porges, and we're going to combine it with some yin yoga. And that will be coming out this summer. And then the podcast was a way for one of my teachers, Leslie, Ryan, and I decided it was time to create a platform to talk about the intersection of psychology, somatics, spirituality. And so that will be launching in 2024 as well.
Yay.
Yay. The last thing I'll say, which you've expressed some interest, is showing up as a mentor, right? For those that are on the path. And so I have a mentorship program now and different ways that people can engage through supportive mentorship.
Beautiful. And so, Paula, do you have all of this together in one place where people can learn about it?
I do. I have a website, www.paulascatoloni.com. I have a Facebook page, Paula Scatoloni Transformative Harmonics, and I'm on Instagram as well with my name, and LinkedIn. So there's different ways people can find me.
Wonderful. And I'll put all of that in the show notes too, so everyone can easily see it. And I just want to say too that words limit, verbal expression limits what you can really experience with this. It's helpful to convey things through words, but it's really inadequate, I feel, to capture what the experience is like. And in my body, I have much more capacity to hold uncertainty and to just be with not knowing what's going to happen, and not needing all this explanation about everything before I can try something, and also being able to discern whether or not it's for me once I am doing it. So, and that again, among all the other healing experiences that I've been deeply working into for years, the experience that I had with you in your group has been very significant in that expansion within myself. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I trust that who is supposed to be there will be there, and that the time was right for you.
Yeah. Oh, Paula, I'm so happy that I had you back here. Thank you so much for coming to Therapy Chat again.
Thank you for having me. It was a joy, and I'll come back anytime.
Oh, yay.
Thank you for listening to Therapy Chat with your host, Laura Reagan, LCSWC. For more information, please visit therapychatpodcast.com.